Hello, Tim.
Hello, how are you?
How you doing?
Chilly.
Doing?
I want warmer weather. I want.
Why are you smiling?
Yeah, well, hey, it's all good. Life is good. A week from today, I'll get my second shot for the vaccination. So,
Oh, you're a little ahead of us. We get it next Thursday, so I'm just hoping that none of the weather interferes with it or the supply is there because we're
Right.
we're
yeah,
right at the last day we can take it. So
yeah,
other doctor appointments got in the way. So
yeah. I just want it over and done with. I don't know if I'll have reactions. Some people do, some people don't. But
which one you taking?
I have Moderna.
Okay, that's the one they get the reaction on the second shot.
Yeah,
But the worst I've heard is somebody had a headache and had to go to bed for a couple of days,
right.
felt sore arm, but I haven't heard of anybody having any type of serious effects more than a couple of days.
No, no, and actually, I know a few people who've had almost nothing.
Right, right,
So, like Caleb, he had a sore arm for a day and a half. That's all that happened to him. That's all.
right. That's what that's pretty much what I've been hearing.
So,
I heard one person I know had to take the bed with an aspirins because not aspirins, Advil or something because she had a nasty headache, but
right,
that only lasted about a day and a half.
exactly. It's worth it to me. I don't care. I just want it.
Well, I think that's a minor price to pay for, the possibility of getting COVID without it. So,
Right. Yeah, and then of course we have to be fortunate. We're not facing what they're facing down in Texas. That's for sure.
well, yeah, you know, it's so ironic. I mean, they had this warning 11 years ago when they wrote a 210-page federal report on the inadequacies of the Texas power system. But no, we don't want to hear from government interference and big government. And, they're paying a nasty price right now. And
We are.
it could have been avoided, but they didn't want to spend the money on it.
Right. No, I know. And I have friends that moved to Austin just this past spring. They haven't even been there a year yet. And they said, people told us, oh, we really don't get snow in Austin. It really doesn't get that cold in Austin. Things here are, it's a pretty easy. And they're like, they lied.
Well, it's amazing. And then I remember the first day the governor blasts, this green program and look at the wind generators. The wind generators have failed. It's amazing, though. The wind generators in Canada do not fail.
No.
Because they put insulation on it.
Right. Well, don't they have wind generators in the science station in Antarctica?
Well, I know the whole point is cold isn't what kills it. It's not preparing for cold that does.
Exactly. Yeah, I know. I mean, I lived in Ohio, so they were always ready. I mean, we would have major snowstorms, like blizzards, whatever, but they were prepared because it's Ohio. It gets cold. It gets snowy there.
All right.
So, yeah, it could be inconvenient, and yeah, you may have to stay home for a couple days. To be honest with you, in all the years I was in Ohio, there was only one time where we had such a severe blizzard that the power went out, and I think it was out for maybe a day and a half. But of course, we were prepared because we knew that could happen.
Well, it's kind of interesting. Texas is also the only independent energy network in the entire country. They
Right.
don't get any feed from any other states. They don't feed out. They go it alone, so the government can't interfere with them.
Right.
Now, of course, They want government generators.
Well, and of course, right away, President Biden, signs emergency funds for the state of Texas.
Yeah.
Even though, our former president would, if it was a blue state, he would try to, well, look at how he never really helped California during the wildfires because it
Oh
was
yeah, I
a,
remember that. That was an act of God. You can't.
well, and they're blue. He doesn't want to help blue states.
I
Or
know
didn't want to help blue states. So I don't know. And then you got Ted Cruz heading off to Cancun.
that had to be funny. I mean, he really stepped on his political. I could not quite believe the timing on that one. That really went over
Yeah,
very big. So
very.
I'm going to grab a quick cup of coffee here. I'll be right.
Okay. All righty.
Okay.
If Larry and Jane are coming in today?
I'm sorry.
If Larry and Jane are coming in today?
I do not know. The link worked fine, so no fault there.
I think we finally have it figured out. I hope, so let's see. Well, okay, so let's get going on Exodus chapter 25, verse 1 to chapter 27, verse 19. This parasha is called Terumah. So it actually opens with these two lines. These are the first two verses of Exodus 25. The Eternal spoke to Moses, saying, "Tell the Israelite people to bring me gifts. You shall accept gifts from every person whose heart is so moved." So that's Exodus 25, verses 1 and 2. These two verses open the Torah portion for this week. And Moses sets about at this point instructing the people on the building of a portable tabernacle in God's honor. It'll be a structure that will be the constant reminder of God's presence among the people, because the fear is that once they leave the site of the revelation, which occurred in the last Torah portion, once they leave that behind, that they'll need a structure to keep God's presence ever forefront in their minds and in their hearts. So without some sort of physical reminder, it could be too easy to forget their relationship, their covenant with God. The directions for building this Mishkan or this tabernacle are meticulously laid out in this Torah portion. Now, the Mishkan is supposed to be a portable structure, one that they can carry with them from place to place as they move through the desert. However, as it is described in quite great detail in this Torah portion, almost all Torah scholars agree that it would be a far too heavy structure to be easily carried through the desert. Still, the description is needed to suggest a structure that was made of the finest metals, the finest materials available, if it were going to be built to be truly worthy of God. Now, there is some historic debate concerning the tabernacle, yet historians agree that portable sort of shrine type structures were not uncommon among other wandering peoples, even among the wandering tribes of Arabs in the pre-Muslim days. So while some aspects of the description are very likely fictitious, and were added in later, or they're embellishments that were added in later, there is a precedence in history for a portable tent-like structure that was meant to serve as a reminder of who or what is truly holy. Moses gives Bezalel and Oholiab very precise descriptions of what the tabernacle is to be once it is completed. Now, if we were going to try to recreate it today, if we were going to try to build it today based on the description in the Torah, we would find that our task would be a little bit stymied. We wouldn't be able to do a very good job by the fact that the measurement terms used in the Torah have several different meanings and were not entirely clear which meaning was used among the ancient peoples. But let's go back and look more closely at these first two verses that begin this Torah portion. God instructs Moses to tell the people that they are to bring these gifts, these materials that are needed to build the tabernacle from among their own belongings. So they're each to search their own belongings and bring what they can. They are to bring them as gifts. Now we can contemplate whether an object is truly a gift if you've been told to bring it. Now, in most understandings of the word gift, it suggests an item that is given of your own free will to someone else as a way of honoring or a way of remembering a significant event. It could be a birthday, it could be a wedding, it could be a b'nai mitzvah. Here, God tells Moses to tell the people that they are to bring gifts. Now, the Torah does make clear that the people, when told of this divine directive, bring things freely to Moses that are all different kinds of things, each what he can afford. Some bring more, some bring a little bit less, because each person's personal needs, size of family dictate what they can logically give. But they are bringing it to honor God, and they all donate these things with seemingly, from what the Torah tells us, with the proper mindset. Now, the articles for the tabernacle are not brought in any way begrudgingly. People aren't fretting and fuming about it, but they're bringing it freely with open hearts. So let's take a look at our own society. Is it not perhaps from this Torah portion that the idea of supporting our own modern Jewish institutions, such as synagogues and federations and community centers, takes its root from this Torah portion? In the Torah, the people are asked to give what they can to build the tabernacle to honor and remember God's presence in their midst at all times. Today, we are asked to financially support our institutions to hopefully guarantee the presence of our faith and our culture in the present as well as in the many years to come. If our institutions falter, then what will ultimately become of the Jewish people? This system of bringing freely has evolved into our modern system of what we call membership fees or membership dues. Though our synagogues and federations are much involved in charitable work, they themselves are also businesses and they have bills that need to be paid.
Right.
And yet, we may hear some say that it should not cost a certain amount of money to come to pray. And that is an argument that certainly has merit. Now, while most modern congregations have a due structure with varying levels of amounts dependent upon different factors, we are not a religion that demands people to openly tithe their income, as is true with some other faith communities. We also do not have a tradition of passing a collection plate during a part of our worship services on either a Friday night or a Saturday. Because traditionally, if you go to traditional Judaism, money is not really to be handled or exchanged on Shabbat. We also know that we do not want to be in the business of turning people away who are seeking a spiritual home. Because of this, we know that our financial offices work to guarantee that anyone who truly seeks membership can be welcomed into our congregations. So then, how does this all relate back to the Torah portion this week? When Moses goes to the people and asks them to contribute, as I said, they give very willingly and they give very freely. In fact, they give so much that at one point Moses has to ask them to stop, to cease, because so much has been donated, so much has been given. We all know, though, that when we have a personal investment in something, we tend to treat it much more carefully. If we had a personal stake in something, whether it's monetary or in some other way, we are more invested in it. Unlike some, I'm going to use a personal example here. Unlike some of my very lucky friends, when I wanted my first car, my parents did not give me a vehicle, nor did they buy me a vehicle. I had a part-time job and I saved my own money to buy my first car all on my own. Now, granted, I had an uncle, and my uncle ultimately loaned me part of the price of the car, but only with an agreement that I was to pay him back monthly, which I did. I treated that automobile like it was showroom new, like it was a Rolls Royce, because I was personally invested in it with my own hard work and my very own cash. So I think this is kind of true with God as well. If we, like our ancient ancestors, are invested in some way in our faith community and in our God, then we look at that as something special, something to be cherished. We are far less likely to take it for granted or to treat it sort of cavalierly. It takes on a greater importance to us because we have some investment in it. So, a lesson that we can all take from this Torah portion is to give freely and willingly, give with an open heart in all aspects of our lives. We've all been told throughout our lives by either our parents, our teachers, our grandparents, but somebody has probably said to us at some point that it is better to give than it is to receive. We also know that when we do give, we do receive back in so many ways, sometimes in ways that we can't really count. It's a lesson that our ancestors learned as they were about to go wandering in the desert, and it's a similar lesson that we can still carry with us today. So there you go. Interesting ideas that I thought was kind of how we maybe came to the idea that if we're going to have structures in our community, Jewish synagogues, federations, etc., we've got to be willing to support them. What happens if we don't? What's going to happen to the Jewish people if we don't? And I think it's really important right now because with COVID and, we're not having services in our synagogues. I mean, not just us, and we're talking across the country, synagogue buildings are sitting empty and, they're not being used for worship and all of that. But yet they still need to be supported. They still need, the electricity still needs to stay on, the heat or the air conditioning needs to stay on. We can't just sit back and say, oh, well, we're not going to do it anymore. So I think that's just kind of what struck me as I was reading about the people being so willing to give what they had, each in his or her own way, to building the tabernacle. They wanted to see that it was supported, it was going to be for the honor of God. And I guess we still kind of have the same idea present in our world today. So anybody, any comments? Yes, go ahead.
I see my own. Yeah.
You are.
Yeah. Interesting enough, the tabernacle and the building of the ark. I don't know if you got over to Israel and went down into the Eilat area. There's a national park down there out in the desert where supposedly King Solomon mines were. But anyway, there's a group who built the tabernacle out there to the exact, what they claim, the exact specifications and materials that are listed in the Bible. So I don't think it was a Jewish group, by the way, but it was an interesting group and an interesting lecture. And they even set up everything they knew about the grounds. Have you ever seen that?
No, when we were in Israel, when we took the trip with the rabbi, and Flo, you were on that trip as well. We did not get down to southern Israel to Eilat.
No, there wouldn't be enough time. That's
right. That's one of our goals. Caleb and I want to return to Israel sometime in the next couple of years. Hopefully, COVID passed and we can travel again, and see the parts that we did not see, and go back for another trip to Israel. But I find it fascinating. So, seeing this, can you give us some idea of just how big was it, or how small was it, or was it very grand, or was it more simple, or because in the description in the Torah it sounds so grand, and so laden with all kinds of things.
It's interesting. If I had thought about it and read it ahead of time that we'd go into this, I could have tried to dig up the pictures I had of that. I don't even remember which year. We have been to Israel many, many times, probably over 30, but I'm not sure which trip it was. But fairly simple. I mean, it was elegant, but in a simple manner. And the materials. It was smaller than what we had envisioned, but when you realize that it was meant to be portable and to travel, you could understand that.
Right.
But it was interesting, nevertheless.
I wanted to say when we were in Israel, which was our only trip to Israel, they took us to, I think is it David's Gate or David's Tower? Is there something?
Yeah, it's David's Tower.
Well, when we were in David's Tower, I remember that we went to a place where they had a group of people that were actually trying to reproduce things that would be when the Messiah would return. And they were weaving cloth, and they were basically assembling the jewels, the vestment of the high priest with all of the jewels in the proper places. And I don't remember if they had a recreation of the tabernacle there, but I think we can probably go online and take a look at it and see if it was there, because these were people that were basically sitting around almost like a community of, when we saw them, they were weaving. So it was almost like one of these, places where people do patchwork quilts kind of thing, a group of people that just got together. And but apparently they were strong believers, that the Messiah would come, and we want to be prepared for him, and we want to have all the vestments, and to perform all the rituals just according to the way the Bible was.
So they weren't really trying to necessarily do a historic reenactment.
No, I think they were. They were basically, as far as I saw, they went to the Torah. The way it was explained to us is that they took all the instructions as best they could, from the Torah, and they tried to basically weave the cloths and make the vestments. And I don't know if they got as far as making a tabernacle, but I think they would have.
Yeah, it's interesting because, like I said, when I was, doing some background reading, most of the scholars of the Torah say that the way that it's described, it would have been far too heavy to be easily portable. But then they follow that up by saying that they believe the description was later enhanced and embellished as the Torah was being put together, that very likely it maybe wasn't quite as ornate as what we have now. Some of the details, just because the idea was supposed to be in honor of God, so they embellished some of the details. The other thing that I, as I said when I was reading, was that the measure. It's interesting. I'd love to see how these people did this, because every single measurement is always cubits.
Right, cubic.
And what does a cubit mean? Because according, again, when I was looking at some of the background, they said we're not sure exactly at that particular time among the people what really was a cubit. And they said it could be used in measurement in a lot of different ways, sometimes suggesting it was larger, sometimes suggesting it was smaller. So I'm thinking I guess they would just have to, maybe they had to use some trial and error as they were putting the thing together till they could kind of figure out what the different measurements meant and whatever. I mean, it's a fascinating concept to go back and recreate, what is there, and then go into creating the various vestments, the priestly vestments and things of that sort, which also, are very, very ornate as well, the various vestments, which I think is fascinating too, because as I was reading through a lot of the descriptions, I thought so much of this seems to be still held more by like the Catholic Church than even by Judaism. You look at our clergy, our clergy don't now as rabbis, they don't dress with any kind of really vestments, of priestly vestments. You'll have a talit, you'll have a kippah, And that's about as far as it goes. For the high holy days, they may wear a little bit more of the white robe and everything. But think about, I mean, if you've been to a Catholic mass, a Catholic
Oh, yeah,
service,
absolutely.
the Catholic, they put on a lot of extra stuff, when they're going to, say mass in front of a congregation. There's a lot more that they put on. And from what I understand, not, knowing completely all of this, there is like a blessing and a prayer for everything they put on.
Yeah.
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 So whatever, and I don't know the name of it, but the thing that goes over the top, and there's a certain kind of belt and whatever, and that every one of those pieces that they wear has a certain prayer or blessing as they're putting it on, which almost seems to go back to more of what we're seeing in the Torah, with more of like, priestly vestments and things of that sort.
Right.
So I think it's kind of fascinating that the Roman Catholic Church maybe says held on to it more than we have in Judaism.
Yeah,
As you were, I don't know if you could read this if it's backwards. Who wrote
Who wrote the Bible?
That's right. Yeah.
Which is the book about the doublings in Genesis and the two different stories. But he has a whole chapter here that he calls the sacred tent. And in the sacred tent chapter, he goes into that business of the cubits.
Okay.
And he tries to discuss it. It's been a long time since I read this, and I'll reread it. And I'm sure everybody can get this book online, or maybe it's in their library someplace. And it just reminded me, so I'll go back and I'll take a look at this thing. And he goes back to some of these discrepancies between cubits and between the tabernacle, the width, the length in cubits, and the length of the temple, and whether or not they could construct it. And he does go as far as saying, he comes up with all kinds of little diagrams of the possibility. Is it one wall? Is it two walls? In order to try and make it fit in. So it might be interesting to read that again.
Yeah, I'd have to look that up and just kind of read it for myself, just because I'm curious to know.
That was my Torah doing the ark.
Really?
How to explain about cubics when I told what I was reading.
Fascinating.
By the way, we went to Spain. We went to a museum there with all of the costumes or the robes of the priests in the Catholic Church. It's amazing what they have. They can take care of world hunger all over the place if they sold some of that stuff. It's amazing.
Well, I mean, yes, there is a lot of, of the various and sundry things that are used by a priest to say mass and whatever. There's a lot of gold that is, and by definition, I know certain things that are used in saying mass must be solid gold. They can't be gold plated. They have to be based on whoever, I don't know who made the ruling, somewhere down the line in the history of the Catholic Church. But I know, for example, that the goblet, or chalice as they call it, that is supposed to hold what becomes the blood of Jesus, has to be solid gold. I mean, there is that required. There used to be that requirement. Maybe they've, softened up on some of those things, in recent years. I don't know. But yes, Jeff.
Question. You talked about tithing.
Right.
I thought that was originally a biblical concept, but you mentioned that it really wasn't a Jewish concept. It goes back more to Christianity.
Well, it's biblical, but I'm talking about the way that we support today. When we look at how we support our institutions, our synagogues, our federations, our Jewish community centers and whatever, we are not bound to a strict tithing sort of, as for example, the LDS Church. Where
Right.
Very, very strict tithe that you are bound to give. You don't have any real leeway. You don't have any real say. So that's just kind of the way it is. Whereas today, we still support our institutions, our to make sure that Judaism survives and keeps going. But we're not under a strict tithing system. We don't, and as I said, we don't pass the plate. A collection plate during services, which, if you've been to, a lot of churches on their Sunday services, the plate comes, down the row, and, everybody throws in whatever they throw in. We have a due structure, and it's set, but it's also fluid because, as I said, we don't want to keep people out. We don't want to say, well, you can't be a member, you can't pray here, you can't be a part of our community. So we keep it fluid enough so that people that perhaps would struggle or have hardships can still be a member of the synagogue, still be a member of the community. Well, that just made everybody get quiet. Whenever you talk about money, people
Talk about dues. Don't talk about due structures.
well, there is this movement in Reform Judaism, and I don't know that it's also gone over to the conservative movement. There are more than one now synagogues that have done away with due structures.
Yeah, we
On
had
what-
one in New Jersey that that our kids used to belong to. Actually, it was a conservative synagogue, and they also went away from it. It was give what your conscience demands, or says you should give. And I spoke to the rabbi there because our kids went to grandkids went to a pre-Hebrew school there, and I spoke to the rabbi there, and I said, "How is that working out?" And he says they are overfunded. At least this was several years ago. That people gave more than they had given as part of the dues, voluntarily. And this was, I mean, just one little piece of information. So
Right.
I wouldn't draw a conclusion from it, but it was interesting.
Well,
It's an experiment. Yeah.
but I have read, I mean, in just coming across things I'm reading, through the reform movement, through the URJ and whatever, that synagogues that, as you said, who have tried this, have said that ultimately they end up being overly funded or more funded than when they had a very strict due structures, when they sort of leave it up to people's conscience, like what can you give to support the community, and that they have found that it has worked out very, very well. I mean, I think if I were a synagogue board member or whoever makes these decisions, it would be very scary to say we're going to scrap dues and go away from that because you've got to guarantee something there. And we're going to try this system of, people giving what they feel they can according to their own, financial situation. I think it would be a very scary thing to say this is what we're going to do. But what I'm reading is that the follow-up is that most synagogues that have done it seem to be doing very well. Now, of course, this is all pre-COVID. I don't know whether COVID has impacted any of that or not. I mean, COVID's impacted everything. So, are people still giving, even though they're not able to go, even though they're not able to, attend services and things like that? That would be an interesting follow-up to look at.
Yeah, well, there's always a very strong correlation between retention and dues, particularly after bar mitzvahs. I mean, we saw this, growing up in New Jersey, where for many years they had every Saturday morning was a bar mitzvah.
Right.
And all of a sudden, the congregation aged and the bar mitzvahs were no longer coming. And a lot of the people who had kids that were bar mitzvah age had fulfilled their, I'll use the word requirement, and they no longer thought it necessary, and they left. And you try and entice them back with a little bit better due structure or some kind of an incentive. And most of the time it didn't work. And I remember going to many board meetings in New Jersey, and there was always this conversation about the Chabad. Why are so many people now going to the Chabad, which basically is either no due structure or just, give a voluntary contribution for their kids. And that they always viewed that as like a big competition. They were eating our lunch, so to speak.
Yeah, it's interesting because when we were living in Fort Lauderdale, most of the synagogues, well, the Reform synagogues in general, but especially Reform synagogues, were more west. They weren't like east, close to the beach. They were more in the western suburbs. There was one Reform synagogue in East Fort Lauderdale, in more of the beachy area. But what was interesting was that very close to downtown Fort Lauderdale, right off the main shopping and dining street, which was, pretty ritzy, there was a Chabad. And the place would be overflowing. Like we're talking like standing room only in terms of services and things of that sort. And it was always kind of to the consternation of some of the established synagogues, as the people are like busting down the doors at Chabad, and we're trying our best to get people to come and to be involved and whatever. And so I could see that same dichotomy. But I will tell you that the Chabad in Fort Lauderdale was like, they made no judgments on anybody. Come, show up, pray, eat, do whatever. And it was always a very lively sort of gathering. I will say that. And it seemed to appeal to a lot of people.
Yeah, no, I think they are drawn in possibly at first by the lack of a due structure, and then they do get involved. I don't know how many people actually really embrace all of their, I can't see coming from a more liberal kind of thing or more questioning. Every time you talk to a Chabad rabbi and you try and ask a question, the question is God's will. Everything is preordained, everything is written down, everything is predetermined. It's almost like you have no free choice in what you're doing. Whatever you do, whatever happens is for the good. It doesn't. So there's no end to the conversation when they believe that every word in the Torah is
Yeah,
by God, not inspired by people who may have thought they heard God. But so I'd heard actually some very, very prominent rabbis saying that, yes, they may go to the Chabad, but they really are not embracing, the full dictum of the doctrine of the Chabad, and I think that's probably true.
I can tell you it's true because we used to have people who would try to convince us, the two of us, to go to Chabad. Oh, come to us, come for services, come for whatever, and we were always like, oh, thank you very much, but it's really, I don't really kind of subscribe to Chabad theology and all of that. So finally, I had a conversation with one of the rabbis at Chabad. And I said, okay, I hear all these wonderful things, and this is in Fort Lauderdale. I said, I hear all these wonderful things, and people said we should come to service. Oh, yeah, you should. I said, well, you know what? I'm going to tell you, Rabbi, if you will marry the two of us, then I'll be more than happy to come to the services. And he's like, well, don't worry about that. Let's not talk about that now. We can talk about that later. I said, no. I said, I really kind of think I want to talk about it now. I said, because if I'm going to be showing my support by even just showing up for a Shabbat service or whatever, then I want it to be a place where I believe in that. And part of what I believe in is that, Caleb and I can be married. So if you're willing to say, yes, you would do that, I'd be happy to come and join you for Shabbat services. But if you can't look me in the eye and tell me that, then I'm afraid I'm not going to be showing up. And that was the last conversation we ever had.
Yeah, that's a bridge too far for them. They are very welcoming, and they are very rational, and they're very much secular in the way that they do market things. I mean, they are very savvy in their marketing techniques, and they don't press you, but would you like to put on tefillin? And it's sort of a step in the door. You put your foot in the door, and then pretty soon you're putting a banner outside, and pretty soon now you're late tefillin. I think that's their hope. But even if you just make yourself a little bit more Jewish, this is what they say,
right,
that they're happy with it supposedly. But I think their ultimate goal, obviously, is to move everybody as far to their way of thinking as possible, which is something that in a modern lifestyle, and once you've seen Paris, how are you going to go back to the farm kind of thing?
Well, yeah, well, their theology, according to what they told me, was that the reason they're out there, trying to drum up, people to come, is that they really believe in their theology that once every single Jewish person is following and performing all the mitzvot, that's when the Messiah will come.
Mm. Yeah.
And I'm thinking, oh, good luck on that one. So everybody's got to light Shabbat candles. Everybody's, got to make sure, because they would be around big time during Hanukkah too. And they'd be handing out menorahs and candles to people. And, we'll teach you the blessings. We'll teach you how to light the menorah properly. If you don't have one, we'll give you one. Granted, it was, kind of a little cheesy, flimsy thing, but still you'll have a menorah and you'll light it because we need everybody to be doing the mitzvot. So that's when the Messiah, Mashiach, will come. And I'm thinking, okay, that's a lovely thought, and I will give you A+ for your energy level and what you're doing, but your theology is not going to have the appeal to a large number of people who may be coming from a Reform, a Reconstructionist, and even a conservative background.
One of the interesting conversations I had with the Chabad rabbi here in Bluffton, not the one that you have in Scad. He's a very, very nice fella, and got about the commandments, and I said to him, aren't the commandments kind of like, some are more important than others? Like, they're the Big Ten, so to speak, compared to the other 603, about not wearing, rayon and silk together or whatever, silk and cotton together. And he says, no, they're all equally important. And I couldn't move him from that position. And I mean, I just use that as one particular example of, it just seemed to me that it is just so counterintuitive to have that kind of an argument because, they're written in a book, which we think was possibly God inspired, but he thinks it was written by God. But yet, if it's written in the book, then there's no argument. There's no way of discussing any of this. So all the commandments are equally important. You got to obey all 613. Some you don't have to obey because they're, meant to be done in Israel or Jerusalem, and others are only to be done, you can't, but so
And the temple.
Yeah, in the temple. So, so maybe there aren't 613 anymore, but maybe there's 350 or who knows. I haven't counted them. But there are a lot.
It's very interesting though, because they really don't want you to focus on that, at least initially. They just want you to focus on the good. Oh, let's just come in, it's going to be good and whatever. Like I said, I couldn't get him to talk to me about, the idea of marrying the two of us. Oh, let's not talk about that now. Let's not worry about that now. I'm like, no, I'd like to worry about it now, but he didn't want to have that conversation, So it's like, I respect you, Rabbi. Thank you very much. And keep doing what you're doing. And you keep trying to get everybody to do all the mitzvot and all of that. And good luck to you. But it's just not for me.
Yeah.
And the young man who is the rabbi here, I don't think he's gone. I think he's the same one that's here in Savannah at SCAD, is a very, very nice guy. I've spoken to him, and he's very young. Other than his beard, he looks like he's 12. He's a very young guy, and just super nice. But I can't be a Chabad. I just can't. It just doesn't work for me.
And we have one up here right near Sun City, just a mile or so down the road. And he also has formed, a movement around here. And he works very hard. And like you said, he's also very young. But his wife has given birth to twins already. So
twins and triplets, just now triplets.
Oh, wow.
So they have 5.
Oh, back up, Larry. Say that again.
She just had 3 additional. She just had triplets about a week or 2 ago.
Oh, I didn't hear that. Okay.
Wow.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah.
That's a busy house.
You didn't get he had the announcement the other night that they were going to have the Brit ceremony for the boy. I guess at least one of them must have been a boy. So Brit ceremony for the boy of the triplets. So he has 5 now. I mean, his wife is probably 22 years old. Lovely woman. And she, we've been to dinner at their house a couple of times. We were invited. And and it was a comfortable evening, but yet, the discussion was not meaningful. The discussion was everything he wanted to discuss.
Right.
Like you said with, the topic that you raised. No, that's not. He dismissed, that topic politely, but he dismissed it quickly.
Right. Which is, I think, kind of hot. Maybe I don't know if they get some kind of training or whatever to do that. I don't know, it just is kind of a bit of a left turn, but I don't know if you've seen it. I think it's Netflix has this wonderful documentary about 2 Chabad rabbis who go into the outback in Australia.
Sorry. Great. It's very, very good. Yeah.
They're both very their one is very young. They're both young. They've got, their wives are with them, and they're going into these places where the population in the outback is, 50 people, and, just looking to see, is anybody here Jewish? And some of the people have never even seen someone who was Jewish before. And then the one I remember is playing pool in the bar and having a beer with the guys. He's got his, tzitzit, and he's got his, kippah, and he looks very Chabad, but he's playing pool with the guys and just trying to show that, I'm just kind of regular. I can play pool and, have a beer with you guys. And then they get back in and they move on to the next town. And occasionally they did find somebody who had some connection to being Jewish. But what I thought was interesting is at the very end, the one rabbi, I think the younger of the 2, was trying to get a Torah, if you'll recall, for like the northern Queensland's parts of whatever was up there, and they finally got one. They finally get a Torah. So they're going to dedicate the Torah and whatever, and they're carrying it through the streets and, doing what, the sort of Chabad thing. But what I thought was interesting was some of the people that he had met in his travels through the outback came to that town, to that community for the installation and dedication of the Torah. So he did reach people.
Yeah.
It was I found it absolutely fascinating.
And they do have a very active program for trying to keep the youth together. I think that they do, even the pre and post bar mitzvah, that they do a nice job. At least the one congregation we were aware of in New Jersey, the fella there, they are devoted, totally devoted. Their aim is very focused and it's very singular. And there is a place for people who need that. So I yeah,
It's all good.
not for me, but
Not for me, but
No,
it's
no, not
interesting
me.
to have some conversations with him, or lack of conversations with him.
right.
But,
Yeah,
yeah.
it's hard to get into anything to do with science or morality outside of what's written in the Torah. Well, anyway, just as a slight thing, ironically, we're talking about God and Mashiach and different things like that. We saw Oh God again. I mean, it's been many, many years. George Burns
Uh-huh.
in Oh God. I sat there and laughed so hard. I mean, I don't normally laugh at comedy shows, but that one had me in stitches. I mean, it was a very interesting and in many ways a beautiful story, but the poor guy who becomes the messenger, I mean, he's more reluctant than Moses was. And
Oh, you're not talking you're talking to George Burns, or you're
George
talking?
Burns, Oh God.
He's
Oh,
good,
okay.
right.
I thought
That's
you were
been
talking
so
about
long ago.
the Carrey, Jim Carrey movie as well.
No. That was what, God Almighty or something?
God Almighty,
Yeah, that was about the ark. Yeah.
So
Rabbi
anyway,
Astor he gave a talk at Ollie just recently about those, and he used those two movies as references.
okay.
So,
It's been a long time. I'd have to go. Yeah, I'd have to go back and see that one.
Now I'm gonna go back and catch, and I don't remember it at all. Oh God, Part 2, and then it's a trilogy, which I didn't realize. God and the Devil, and George Burns plays both God and the Devil.
That one I don't even remember. I knew there was a part 2. I remember that, but I did not know there was a third.
There's a Part 3 because I just saw it on Turner Movie Classics, and they talked about the third movie.
Wow, I don't even remember that. I just remember the first one, and I remember the part 2, but I don't remember there being a third one for some reason.
It made George Burns wildly popular and successful. And as a matter of fact, I forgot which magazine it was. In his 80s, he was voted as the sexiest man in America. So,
Well, you know what? Good for him. Good.
and he had women. I mean, he had women all around the time smoking a cigar. So I think it was Esquire magazine, but he was the sexiest man in America one year.
Well, at 80 something, good for him. More power to him. Mazel tov.
Yep.
So yeah, I mean, it's like it's all a matter of how we look at God. I mean, there you have a Hollywood film where we are embodying God in a comedian kind of thing, but and there's nothing wrong with that if it's as I always say, you come up with your own concept of what God is and what works for you, and you could go around a room and everybody could have a whole different spin on what God is or how each person kind of deals with or envisions God, because it's and especially in Reform Judaism, it's kind of up to you, and we don't paint pictures and we don't have sort of statuary and things like that like you will see in other religions. So you have to kind of create your own concept of what works based on what you know.
And of course, if you remember the movie, when he comes back and makes an appearance, of course, nobody will accept him. I mean, well, the general public, especially the ministers and the priest and the rabbi. I mean, when they have the big religious conference and want to ask him questions, nobody could believe it. So
yeah, well,
so if the Mashiach came back next week, I think it would be very hard to have people agree on it.
oh, no doubt. If somebody, if somehow, the Mashiach shows up, who is going to believe And what would cause us to believe? Because I mean, we are all, I think, most of us are so skeptical. I mean, in the society we live in. So how would we? I'll be the first to admit I would need a lot of convincing somehow. I would
That's
need
if
a
you
lot.
believe the Mashiach is really a person. If you believe the Mashiach is like God, an idea,
Right,
that he is a messianic message,
right,
where things will get better, that the world will heal itself, that we won't have this climate changing, and that the viruses will be controllable, and that people will love each other, that kind of is, the messianic age rather than the
Yeah.
messianic person with a noun, that
exactly.
this one
Well, yeah,
person is
I
going
think
to come
that's
back, the
kind of
silver bullet.
the reform philosophy for sure. We don't think it's going to necessarily be a, being that is going to show up and, announce that I'm the Mashiach, but it's more of a time period when, everybody gets along. There'll be, the always wished for peace on earth, which is so elusive all the time. But that, we're all hoping for that. I would love to see it happen. I'm not going to hold my breath and wait, but
I'd love to see it happen even just in our country,
oh,
let
exactly.
alone worldwide, or just in our state, or just in our community, or even if you say just in, you could just in and narrow it down, and then we'll widen it from there. Take
No,
a
you're right.
step in one direction at least. But it
No,
just doesn't seem. It seems like ideology is just fixed in people's minds, and they are so persuaded by ideology compared to what seems to be reason.
Yeah, I was reading something this morning. It was an article. I'm trying to remember where it was, which publication, but it was talking about people who have lost family members to QAnon, where they've lost. I mean, this woman, she's lost her husband. She says, "My husband is completely into QAnon. He was a great husband, a loving father. They've got teenage children, and he is just totally bought into the QAnon hook, line, and sinker." And she has no idea that if she's ever going to get him back. She has made an escape plan because she thinks at some point it could get so dangerous that she will have to take her kids and go and just leave him. But she claims that she still loves him. She can't have conversations with him anymore because he won't listen to anything other than the QAnon. And apparently now there are organizations for people who have someone in QAnon and don't know what to do, or need help in maybe trying to pull the person out. It was a very long article. It was very eye-opening and also very, very disturbing, because, people are falling into this thing and just hook, line, and sinker. And I'm like, oh, it really did disturb me reading it. I have to be very honest.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
we need a Mashiach. We need a messianic age to, pull us somehow back together, I guess, because it's like you said, the ideologies now are just everything is so divisive right now. And I don't know who or how or how that's ever going to play itself out, over the next couple of years or the several years.
I try to be optimistic. I look back and say, well, we've been through terrible periods in history before, and things did get better. I mean, from Civil War, World War I, World War II, I mean, everything that came with it. It's not great right now in the country, but I'm hoping that eventually cooler heads will perform. I looked at that town hall meeting the other day with President Biden, and I said, well, maybe there's hope in the wings. So, at least for a healing process, but we'll see.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I think he is trying to set a tone that is more certainly in line that direction, that way of thinking. And my hat's off to him, because he certainly has his work cut out for him. That's for sure.
Right.
And it's not going to be easy for them. And part of me says, maybe we need some younger, newer blood. Okay, so we have a senator from Georgia who's 33. Some of these younger people who may be getting into government with, more progressive ideas. But even then, I don't know. I was never someone, who was really kind of into term limits, but I'm kind of maybe changing my mind on that now. just to get some
Yeah.
new.
Well, when
new
you hear
people.
things like that senator from Wisconsin, I mean, I don't want to get too political, but
Right, I
the
know.
senator from Wisconsin, he was saying it wasn't an insurrection because you have to have guns for an insurrection. I mean, how people can narrowly define, a spin on something. The governor of Texas, or the ex-governor of Texas, the one who was in the Bush cabinet, he's saying, well, the people in Texas are happy to give up their, a couple of days of discomfort
Oh,
from
yeah,
not having
yeah.
fuel and heat and water,
Yeah,
and
right.
everything,
Yeah,
because we want to be. Yeah, I didn't even realize Texas had their own grid, but yeah, we
yeah.
want to be independent of the federal government for energy. And I mean, how they spin the whole thing around, and with
Yeah.
the governor now of Texas, well, it's the fact that we didn't have enough wind energy to back us up, so wind is no good. It's not a grid failure; it's a wind failure. I mean, it just I mean, those arguments that we hear.
They
Yeah.
said there was supposed to be an antifreeze type of thing for the windmills, and they didn't put it in. So the windmills froze up. Didn't want to
Yeah.
spend the money.
All right. They didn't spend the money,
It
and
comes down to the money. It always well, why does it always come back to money somehow? But it does. So I know. Well, let's hope we can get this Mashiach or Messianic age here, because we probably could really all use it right about now for a better future. So, well,
Yeah,
thank you,
we can.
everybody, and have a
All
great
right. Well,
weekend.
Shabbat shalom, and maybe
Shalom.
we'll see you
Yeah.
Shabbat
tomorrow
shalom.
or the next
Shalom,
day.
and stay warm, because it's pretty chilly out there today.
Yeah.
and
It is. We got back. Yeah,
Yeah.
we just got back here. We went over to double check on when we're getting our second shot, because there was some confusion, and they told us originally we had to go to Beaufort for the Beaufort Hospital there, and now apparently we're able to get it right over here. So the whole computer system is really all still messed up.
Well, I'm a
I
week
don't know.
from
Have you
today.
guys had it, Flo? Have you had yours? Have you
I
had
get
your
my
shots?
second one tomorrow.
Oh,
Oh, good.
Mazel tov on
Good.
that.
Good.
Yeah. Thank
Yeah,
you.
I get
Thank
mine
you.
a week
Jeff,
from
when are you
today.
getting yours?
next Thursday.
Oh, good. We're getting ours next Tuesday. Next Thursday. Yeah, so we'll all be okay. Not okay, but I mean,
Well, right.
who
we'll be
knows what's
better
going to
off.
happen? The South
Okay, next
African
week,
variant.
I'll
Yeah.
do Torah study, and as soon as Torah study's over, I'll be jumping in the car and heading over.
And the good news is the numbers are falling rapidly.
Yeah,
I
I've
mean-
seen that too. So that is, there has been some positive, news coming out on that. So that's
Yeah.
good too. So,
All right. Bye-bye, everybody. Good seeing you.
Shalom. Bye-bye.
stay safe. Shabbat
Shabbat
shalom.
shalom.